Welcome to another episode of On Point. Ladies and gentlemen, today I have a very special guest with us. His name is Terry Gorry. He has been in business for my entire lifetime, has been in business since 1986. I just doing my research, I thought that he has co-authored only one book, but realized yesterday that he has authored 7 books, and they have been from all different aspects of Irish law, from buying a new house to employment law, and also the most interesting cases from the Irish legal system in terms of employment. You can find a lot of work that he has done. He's a one-man army when it comes to content creation. He's running his own social media, his own small business, also guiding a lot of people through their journeys, maybe buying a house or through their employment careers. And I have had the pleasure to get him to come join us on this podcast today, this morning. Terry, how are you?
Good, thank you. How are you?
I am great. I'm great. It is fantastic. I think work has been, pretty smooth for me since we've all gotten used to work from home these days. What about you? Are you back in the office or are you in
Yeah,
a
I've been
hybrid
I've
situation?
been in the office all the time because we were considered to be an essential service. So
Hmm.
it was good actually. It was good to get out of the house because obviously some people would prefer to stay at home. I would certainly prefer to go into the office and just have a
Yeah,
divide, as it were, between home and office. So
brilliant,
we're an
brilliant.
essential service, and all my staff would have come in then as well. And a lot of my work then I can do online with video consultations, phone, email, or
Yeah.
people could come into the office as well.
And it's completely great. So you're based in Enfield, right, in County Meath?
I'm based in Enfield in County Meath. Yeah, yeah,
That is great. I completely agree with you that for some people it is going to the office, some people it's staying at home, and there are multiple variables involved. And I believe that the flexibility has been great for some people, and that flexibility not being there for the frontline workers and essential workers. I think all of them have done a commendable job, throughout,
yeah,
showing up
absolutely.
and getting the ball running.
Yeah, absolutely.
Terry, today I wanted to discuss something which a lot of people don't realize. It is essential. Everybody agrees to that. But when it comes to employment law, things that are happening in the workplace, a lot of people might have, presumptions, or also, some kind of hints that they might be discriminated against. There
Mm,
might be some bullying in the workplaces. There might be things that are not happening correctly in the workplaces, but just because a lot of employees don't know that these are things that they have the rights towards, they would might not even, I would say, highlight this or report this. I
mm,
wanted to cover those gray areas today with you, and there is nobody better than you to go over these practices. I
mm.
wanted to first get your work background and your introduction to all the work that you've done in the employment law and legal work that you've done within your space, and then take us through your journey. So you've started around 1986, authored 7 books. How has the journey been for you?
Well, I mean, it's been up and down. I mean, anybody who is starts their own business and is an entrepreneur will experience up and downs in any, no matter what sphere of activity you're in. So there always has been up and downs. I've been in retail, I've been in investment, property investment,
Uh-huh.
property construction. I've been in the pub game. I've had filling stations, and then I've been a late convert, as it were, to the legal profession. So I've seen a fair amount of business activity and gathered a lot of experience, a fairly wide range of experience. I've been an employer then since 1986. So I mean, I was an employer when I was 23. And that had its own problems. But obviously, I've seen the employment law, as it were, from both perspectives, from the employee's perspective and the employer's perspective. And it can be a fraught enough relationship at times. There are some very, very good employers. There are some employers that are not so good. And there are employers then who are willing, but simply don't know what the right thing to do is, and so on. a lot of employees then will throw around words like harassment and bullying and discrimination in the workplace and so on. But often these things are misunderstood or misconceptions, because if somebody gets, for example, a poor performance review or something of that nature, they're often on to me complaining about being bullied in the workplace and so on. But when you actually roll back or unpick the situation and peel off the layers, you discovered that it's simply a performance review or some sort of review or some incident that's occurred in the workplace. And that simply is not bullying. I mean, clearly management is entitled to manage. They must have some way of, organizing things and maintaining order in the workplace and so on. So there's always a certain conflict, I suppose, between employer and employee, But there is a lot of misconceptions. Employees have a lot of protections, but they also have obligations and responsibilities. And I suppose that's where people can go off the rails a little bit. They come to a solicitor and then they're disappointed to discover that they actually have no case or very, very weak case or whatever,
Yeah. That is a great point that you mentioned, that there is a lot of confusion between, what is management, what is harassment, what is bullying. I wanted you to, give me further context, because I've seen that there's also power system involved when it comes to legal systems. I've been, lucky enough to work in 3 different continents. This is my first time ever in Europe. So
Yeah.
I've worked in Asia, different power system. When it came to, reporting something, you had no rights. Then moved to Australia, worked over there. And I realized that, there's a fair bit of rights I can say no without being, feared of discriminated against, or, being reported or being mistreated at workplaces. Came to Europe. I've seen a fair share of not just a strong legal system around the employers and also employees, where everybody's treated fairly, and there's a safer workplace given to everyone. And then now coming to another side of things, where I'm understanding that there's a lot of support there, but in most cases it is not there for exploitation. And both employers and employees needed to understand that there's no ball heavy on one side, where employers are given more support and employees are given more support. It is equal on both sides, because
Yeah.
a lot of time in going through a scenario like COVID, both need to maintain a strong relationship between their business and also human concentration, the way people work, the way people collaborate, and even perform business to be in business at the right time. So things will be very, very good if people maintain that balance. How should one who has no information about the legal system get started to understand what are your legal rights in the area that you're working in? What would your advice be to get started?
Well, I mean, I suppose you could, firstly, responsible employers, and lots of employers are responsible. A lot of them firstly, they have contracts of employment. So you have a contract of employment, and that is the basis for the relationship between the employer and the employee. So that would be the first port of call, just to see what are your entitlements and indeed what are your obligations. Some employers then will have staff handbooks, or they'll have fundamental or basic policies and procedures, like a grievance procedure, a dignity at work procedure, and a disciplinary procedure. And if an employee has a look at, for example, the dignity at work policy or procedure, they'll see there that there is some commitment to dealing with the likes of, well, your dignity in the workplace as a person and as an employee, anti-bullying, anti-discrimination, and that type of thing. So they'd be the first areas that an employee should have a look at to see exactly what is open to them, what can they do to raise any concerns that they might have. So they would be encouraged normally to make a complaint or raise some sort of a concern internally in the first instance. And then if they're not satisfied with the outcome from the employer, it's open to them to go to the Workplace Relations Commission. And the Workplace Relations Commission is a statutory body set up by the state to deal with employment problems. So it's an easily accessible system that an employee can raise a concern with, can bring a complaint to, if they feel that they've been unfairly dismissed or discriminated, or the employer simply is not enforcing their own policies and procedures and so on.
Yeah.
So the first place would be contract. Second place would be the staff handbook. And then you can obviously have a look online at various websites, the likes of the Workplace Relations Commission website, workplacerelationscommission.ie, I think it's called. That would have a lot of information on it then as well. And there's a very good website actually there, Citizens Information. Citizens Information is very, very good. And it deals not just with employment law, but with, you know, all aspects of citizens' rights and so on. It is a good, very, very good service. It's a free service, and their website is excellent. And I refer to it myself from time to time if I want just clarity on a particular topic or whatever, and I may have forgotten something or just want to get a steer. But Citizens Information is excellent, you know.
That is great. I'll actually mention that in the comment section below, so all the viewers can actually go back and check the website out, because I've actually used this fair bit since I've moved to Ireland, because I end up, regarding any matter, when I Google things, they have fair bit of information. That's why they're ranked almost on top all the time. So Terry, you mentioned that contracts are something that we should get started with. I've also I actually got this information from you firsthand, because you have also been producing a lot of great content on social media, that employers should make sure that the employee should have the contract in their hand in the first 2 months of their employment.
That's a legal obligation on the employer. And to be honest with you, if an employee ever wants to bring any sort of a claim against the employer, and if it transpires when they come to me that they were never given a written contract of employment, then I know that there's at least one claim that's going to succeed. Because if you bring a claim for failure to give a written contract, and if they can't prove they've given a written contract, that's a very easy, straightforward win for the employee, you know.
Yeah. And
so if nothing else, it might encourage an employee to go along and say, well, my other claim mightn't be great, it mightn't be very strong, it could be 50-50, but I'm guaranteed to win this one because we know he didn't give me a contract. So it's an open goal, or a tap-in put, or whatever way you like to want to describe it. Then that's why an employer should ensure to do that, you know.
Got it. That's a great point, because I've seen that a lot of time you will get employed and you'll have to reach out to a certain department to get your written contract after they have confirmed it, after you have signed everything and your employment has started. A lot of times you'll also get a link to a certain system to go in and check that out. That's sometimes more complex than the normal PDF file that you'll receive, but in both ways, if you have access to that folder, that will count, right?
It will, yeah, absolutely. I mean, and obviously there's a certain obligation on the employee. I mean, I have seen situations where big employers tend to have a lot of stuff online or in some sort of an intranet situation within the company. And then an employee will come along and say, oh, I was never given a copy of the disciplinary procedure, or I didn't know what the dignity of work procedure was. And that will only carry so much weight when you put forward that argument at the Workplace Relations Commission in a dispute, if the other side can turn around and say, look, you knew full well that all of the policies and procedures were available on the intercompany or the company intranet or whatever, you know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good point. And Terry, now moving on to the next point, I wanted to start discussing about discrimination at workplace. I've seen that this roots from two different scenarios, and I'm not saying that employees or employers are, right. I wanted to touch this point in a way that there are certain ways where people from different diverse groups, when they join in a certain workplace, they'll have different backgrounds. Some will be more confident, some will not be. Some will be outspoken, some will not be. And then the cultures are very different as well from one team to another. If an employer hasn't made sure that it's a comfortable working scenario for all, or some employee, I would say some people are more empowering than others. Some people might think that, hey, I'm being discriminated against because I don't get to speak as much. How would you define discrimination? And when do you think it is discrimination in workplace, given a certain context to this situation?
Well, I mean, in Irish law, there is 9 grounds of discrimination. So if your particular problem doesn't fall within one of the 9 grounds, of discrimination, then it's not discrimination from a legal perspective.
Mhm.
So you may feel that it's unfair. You may feel that somebody is speaking over you or something of that nature. You may feel that your boss, your supervisor, is a poor communicator or something of that nature. But that does not amount to discrimination. Discrimination must fall within one of 9 grounds. For example, nationality, religion, sexual orientation, family status, membership of the traveling community, and so on. So if you're talking about discrimination, you certainly must get your complaint into one of those 9 categories. Now, it is true that certain employees will, obviously, being humans, will have stronger personalities and be perhaps more assertive than others. And then persons coming from different cultural backgrounds and so on will, as you say, have a different cultural approach to conflict and raising their hand or raising issues and so on. That's where the employer has an obligation to ensure that the workplace is fair and is non-discriminatory and has an obligation to ensure that everybody gets a fair shake. So, I mean, for an employer to do that and behave reasonably, the employer must simply ensure that all employees are aware of the various policies and procedures in the workplace. And one would be the dignity at work policy or procedure. That should be brought to the attention of any employee, or all employees rather, who may have a concern,
Yeah.
When it comes down to specific discrimination, I mean, obviously, you'll raise your concern firstly in the workplace. And if you're not satisfied with the outcome, you can always bring a claim to the WRC, Workplace Relations Commission. But you will have to prove facts from which a reasonable inference of discrimination can be shown. And if you can't, then the burden of proof will not be shifted to the employer and you won't win your case.
Okay.
By that, I mean, you might say, well, I was discriminated against because I'm from Slovakia or from Poland or whatever. But if somebody was dismissed for gross misconduct or they were made redundant or something, the fact that they're within a protected group, for example, nationality or whatever, doesn't mean that it's discriminatory. It may well have been a justified unfair dismissal. It may well have been a genuine redundancy. So, you have to, as I say, discrimination and bullying and harassment are kind of toxic words. They are bandied around in the workplace, but it doesn't necessarily follow that they fall within, or the incident will fall within, the legal definition. And that's important,
Yeah. And I wanted to highlight that, look, we all know that in the last 1 decade, all the businesses across the globe have done tremendous work to make their places more safer. Take into account, that these scenarios don't happen. I completely understand that there's an obligation towards the employer to provide that safer place, and they've done so. Because I've seen that there are companies that wouldn't take as immediate action on things like performance, but they will if there's a case in harassment or bullying, and people are provided that kind of safe bracket where they can practice being themselves, be open, be in a safer environment, because that does involve bringing your best out. And when you mentioned about facts, Terry, if you're not able to provide the amount of facts to prove your cases, because I know that it does bring a lot of complications. There's a lot of time involved. There's a lot of back and forth involved. If somebody raises false alarm, is there any penalties to those people?
Yeah, I mean, there can be. Firstly, I mean, there can be within the workplace. If you make a frivolous or vexatious complaint, and it's found to have absolutely no basis, you could be leaving yourself open to a disciplinary procedure. Now, that would be rare enough. It would be unusual enough. But you must remember that if somebody is being accused of discriminating against somebody else, or if somebody is being accused of being a harasser or a sexual harasser, or if somebody is accused of being a bully, that's quite a significant blot
serious
on their,
accusation.
you know what I mean? So everybody has rights, but I mean, people have rights also to defend themselves. So if you say I'm a bully or whatever, I have a right to defend myself, and I want to know what the facts are, and I want to know what the case is that I have to meet, and I'm entitled to meet that. And that's just fair procedures and natural justice and so on. And remember, a lot of law, most of law, is about a balancing of rights between one party and another, and there is always, or generally, a conflict of rights. So, to make the accusation is one thing, and it may well be a genuine belief that you're being bullied or harassed or discriminated against,
Yeah.
but you will have to prove your case, and you will have to show facts from which a reasonable inference of discrimination can be shown. If you can't do that, then your case will fail. I mean, that's no huge thing, but I mean, obviously you need to consider it, and you need to try and weigh up exactly what evidence you have, and it's not easy. I mean, by definition, discrimination and so on, these things are not easy to prove, because let's face it, any bully or any person who's going to discriminate against you is going to be careful enough and not leave a lot of evidence around the place, and they can be difficult cases to win. But, you will get a fair hearing, definitely, at the Workplace Relations Commission. And the adjudicators are very good. They will be able to draw reasonable inferences from what you say and so on,
That's a fair point. And when you mentioned about the bullies and discriminators will also make sure that they don't leave a track of evidence. When we talk about evidence, are we talking about people as witnesses, people that have observed that kind of scenario, or are we
Yeah.
looking at?
I mean, it could be anything. I mean, it could be something that people observed. It could be emails or notes or something, but emails even. But it could be comments. But generally, I suppose it's witnesses. So it's hard enough to get witnesses, but sometimes you will have a silly bully or a silly sexual harasser, whatever, who simply is ignorant and unaware of his conduct being completely inappropriate, and it may be easy enough to get witnesses, but again, sometimes people don't want to get involved and so on. And sometimes it will come down to a very straightforward situation of a conflict of evidence, a conflict of story or narrative between the accuser and the accused. And in that situation, it can be difficult. So the person who's sitting in judgment will have to make a decision which version of events is probably more likely,
Yeah.
And that can often happen. And when you go to court, or when you go to the WRC, or go anywhere else for that matter, you'll always have, or nearly always have, a conflict of evidence. In other words, there's two different versions of events, and maybe three or four different versions. And the adjudicator or the judge or whoever will have to make a decision as to which version of events is the more likely,
Yeah. And I also wanted to highlight that we have so far discussed, what if the party is highlighting something that is kind of difficult to prove. There are parties that might have witnesses, there are parties which might not have evidence. What happens in a scenario where somebody has actually gone through discrimination, maybe harassment in a workplace, but they don't have initial evidence? I think that a lot of times people don't voice these things out because they don't have evidence to prove that. But it is causing a lot of mental stress. It's causing a lot of mental, I would say, even hurt. And this is one of the reasons why a lot of people, I don't know, there are people out there that call these people out by saying, why did it take for you to come out in 3 years? Why did it take you 5 years to come out and report this? But I've seen that when one person gets up and become brave enough to report somebody who is maybe a harasser at work or bully or discriminative, others might find courage as well. What would your advice be to someone that might not have enough proof or evidence, but they've actually gone through significant trauma due to maybe workplace discrimination, bullying, or even harassment?
Yeah, that can be very difficult. I mean, obviously, what they should do, I suppose, if there is a series of events in the workplace, keep some sort of a diary. But I mean, sooner or later, they're probably going to have to take action for their own mental health and mental well-being and so on. So they will have to make the complaint and have it dealt with. The danger, though, is that it may not be upheld, and if it's not, it may make things even worse for them, because now they're a person who's made this allegation. It hasn't been upheld because they didn't have the evidence, and it might even look worse for them. So the choice for them perhaps is to consider working somewhere else. Now, I wouldn't, I mean, it might seem very, very unfair and wrong that somebody would have to consider going someplace else, but sometimes if you can't prove your case and you don't have the evidence, the law may not come to your rescue, and you do need to consider your own personal welfare and well-being and so on. And it may well be that the best thing to do is simply to look at your options and perhaps to save yourself and to look after yourself, perhaps consider another employment. And as I say, that's so unfortunate. But if you don't have the evidence,
Yeah.
you could leave yourself open to continuous bullying then, or harassment, or wherever it is, and a more adverse consequence on your mental well-being.
No, that's a very fair point, and I wanted to also highlight that, folks, this is quite perfect the way Terry has said. It sounds very unfair of us saying this, but this is why a lot of people that work with me to get their first jobs or succeed in their roles, one of the first few questions I talk about is what is the kind of workplace they want to work for. And I discuss toxicity in a workplace being one of the biggest factors, because I've seen that not provided that kind of environment which allows you to thrive, a
Mm,
safer work environment, if you don't step out of that toxic environment, you will never experience a better employer or
mm,
a better opportunity out there. And you'll be surprised to see that it might be difficult. You might feel like you're leaving a really good workplace because the environment is not good enough, but it might take you a lot more time and a lot more stress to go through that kind of hell to fix those situations, then decide to move on and find a better employer for you. And there will be something suitable for you, something that is looking for what you're looking for as well.
yeah.
And that might connect. Terry, that is fantastic. So looking at bullying and discrimination, and also harassment, we're seeing that we need to have a certain evidence, and it should somehow also be an evidence of that it is affecting you somehow in your growth, somehow maybe in your career progression, or in your mental or current life, right?
Well, not necessarily. I mean, to be honest with you, the act of discrimination itself, or the act of sexual harassment or something of that nature,
Mhm.
is wrong and shouldn't be accepted. So you really don't have to prove damage. I mean, obviously, it may well be a traumatic experience for you or whatever, but the very act of having to suffer that in the workplace is simply wrong. You shouldn't have to tolerate it. You don't have to tolerate it. And if you can prove that it's going on or has gone on, you really don't have to prove any loss. And the employer does have to take action, because the employer, remember, is vicariously liable for all employees and has a duty of care to provide a safe place of work. So if some employee is getting away with some inappropriate behavior, well, then ultimately the liability may well be fixed at the employer's door if the employer has failed to take action, because the employee, the victim, will simply bring a claim for discrimination or whatever to the Workplace Relations Commission, and ultimately the employer will be on the hook, because the employer failed to protect the employee, provide a safe place of work, deal with the discrimination properly, and so on. And any award then will be against the employer, not necessarily the transgressor.
Yeah, makes sense, and that's a fair point. I've also recently learned that when you go through a certain experience, maybe one of the three that we have discussed, or there is unfair treatment towards you at workplace, or there's something that the employer is doing which was not contractual, or something that they were legally obliged to, you don't have to even respect the 30-day time frame or notice period on your contract. Is that correct, or is there certain guidelines around that?
No, I mean, if the contract says you must give a month's notice or whatever, strictly speaking, you're supposed to give a month's notice. You may be unhappy with some other aspect of the employment, and you may have other complaints, etc. But you really can't, I don't believe, offset one against the other, because you must prove, remember, your claim or your
Mhm.
allegation of whatever you're claiming has happened in the workplace, which is adverse to you or inappropriate. So, strictly speaking, your employment, if a contract says you must give a month's notice, generally you must give a month's notice. But one thing about that is the employer can release you from that obligation if they believe that the relationship perhaps between you and the employer is at an end or whatever. And it may well be in the best interest of everybody that you're actually released from that. And the employer will simply say, okay, we'll take a week's notice or whatever, if you want to leave. Because there's no point in an
Yeah.
employer forcing an unwilling and unhappy employee to fulfill a contract, because they'll probably go out sick or whatever, and it's just a very toxic sort of a situation. So it's not in the interest of the employer, and it's not in the interest of the employee to
Mhm.
put the two together.
Yeah, yeah, no, makes sense. And it actually tends to weigh with the employers. And the best way out there would be having a discussion with your employer, mention that, look, this is what I'm going through. I would really appreciate if you guys can release me earlier. And
Mm.
that would be the fair share, where they can decide to leave you in a week's time rather than keeping you for the
Yeah,
entire
they may well do, and they shouldn't have a problem with that. But what they would be anxious, I think, to do would be to investigate and find out if they have a genuine problem, a genuine bad apple in the workplace, because they
Mhm.
probably will be concerned that this might occur again if there was some inappropriate conduct, etc. And they'll probably want the opportunity to investigate and see what exactly the position is.
Yeah, that's a fair point. So I wanted to lead this further towards another area. So workplace cultures. I've seen that sometimes it is between two people within the same organization, and sometimes it would be one person against the organization. I've seen a fair amount of cases where there is personal injury within the workplace, and there is also, areas where you might see something happening which is unethical at your workplace. And the initial form of the person acting is, I would try and report it to my internal authorities.
Hmm.
But if somebody is trying to report it to internal authorities, but actions are not taken promptly, which would be the next authority that the person should bring these unethical behaviors towards? Maybe towards people, maybe towards I would say gross functions or behaviors at workplaces. And
Well, I
also
mean, it depends. It depends on the wrongdoing. I mean, obviously, at the one end of the scale, if it was really bad, I mean, you may have to go to the authorities, the police, the Garda Síochána, on the other hand, if it's something to do with employment, for example, or something of that nature, and it affects you, then obviously it's open to you to bring it to the WRC, the Workplace Relations Commission. And if there's any allegation of sort of wrongdoing in the workplace, of maybe perhaps a criminal nature, you could always make a whistleblowing complaint within the employment. And
yeah.
the employer would be very, very foolish to ignore it if it's a genuine whistleblowing complaint, if it's a genuine complaint about relevant wrongdoing, because the protections for employees against penalization and being dismissed for having made protected disclosures is very strong, very, very strong, very expensive perhaps for the employer. So the employer would definitely need to take any report of relevant wrongdoing, in other words,
Mhm.
crime essentially in the workplace, very
Yeah.
seriously. So that could be something unethical, but it could also be, for example, tax evasion or something of that nature. And the employer would be very, very foolish to ignore any reports like that. So it really depends on the conduct, etc. And there's, I suppose, a range of responses from the employee, but the first place certainly would be internally. And you'd be looking to go up the food chain to the board of directors or wherever, if necessary, if your immediate supervisor or manager wasn't taking it seriously or whatever. But probably an employee should protect themselves as well by putting their complaint in an email or in writing of some nature, because at least afterwards they'll be able to say, I did what I could.
That is a good point. I want to now step towards dismissals, because I've seen that fairly becomes one of the biggest reasons why the relationship between the employer and also the employee becomes very, I would say, there's a lot of friction in that case. A lot of time, any employee would not take into consideration that what might be the reason of dismissal, but it will boil down to, at the end of, I am discriminated against, or some other things. And there are cases where people might be dismissed unfairly. There has to be like a fair balance on what resulted in that dismissal. What are the few variables that need to be looked into when it comes to dismissal, and when you feel that you're being discriminated against or it was an unfair dismissal?
Well, the first thing to know is that the Unfair Dismissals Act 1977 provides a fair degree of protection for employees, but it only kicks into action after 12 months employment. So for the first 12 months, the employee is in a vulnerable, weak enough position, and the employer can generally terminate the employment for good reason, bad reason, or no reason.
Mhm.
However, after 12 months, the pendulum swings the other way. And after 12 months, if the employer is to terminate the employee, then he will need substantial grounds. So substantial grounds will include conduct, will include performance, will include redundancy, or some other substantial reason. But
Yeah.
he will need substantial grounds. Otherwise, it is deemed to be an unfair dismissal, you know.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the employer needs to be absolutely sound and absolutely confident that he can justify the dismissal. Now, that's quite possible, and there are plenty of circumstances where an employer is entitled to dismiss, but generally, they must firstly allow the employee fair procedures and natural justice. In other words, they must be put on notice that there's a problem, that they're at risk of being dismissed, and they must be given the opportunity to put their side of the story if there's some allegation of wrongdoing or poor performance. I mean, if it's poor performance, then an employee should be given the opportunity to improve and be put on a performance improvement plan and so on, you know. So the employer needs to be careful. Certain steps need to be gone through. But if they're gone through and if they're gone through fairly, then they can justify a dismissal. But they do need substantial grounds, and there are only 3 or 4 areas where they can actually genuinely have a fair dismissal, you know.
Yeah. And you mentioned that the Fair Dismissal Act actually only kicks in after 12 months of employment. So it's not after you have passed probation, because the misalignment with a lot of folks is once they pass their probation, they believe that it is now under the sphere of the, Fair Dismissal
Yeah,
Act.
there's a misconception there, and there's a kind of a grey area, because most employment contracts will make provision for a probation lasting 6 months.
Yeah.
But so somebody can be in month 7, have passed their probation, but they still don't have the 12 months, you know what I mean, for the Unfair Dismissals Act. So they need to be careful. They really need the 12-month service under their belt, you know.
Yeah.
And generally, if there's a problem with the probation anyway, it may well be extended for 11 months, 11 and a half months, you know. But there is a grey area there, I think, between the end of probation and the 12 months being acquired. And you're not in the clear until you get 12 months, I think, you know.
That is great information. Thanks for that, Terry, because I believe that so far what we have covered is great information for a lot of folks out there. And looking at the work from home scenarios, a lot of employers have now had to come up with new policies, safe working home situation, and cases. How does the workplace injury, claim? Are there any cases that you've seen recently? Because I've heard that workplace injury claims cannot occur if you're working from home.
No, that's not true. And there was a recent case, I think, in Germany where a chap, I think, fell down his own stairs working at home, and he actually successfully brought a claim against his employer. So, I mean, it's early days yet in the Irish scene, in the Irish context. But I mean, it is possible, I suppose, that an employee, if they suffer an injury at home, notwithstanding that it's their home, they may well be able to bring a claim for a personal injury claim against the employer. The employer would have a duty and an obligation, remember, to provide a safe place of work. And if they say you can work from home or it's okay to work from home, then the employer should really try to check out the situation and ensure that it is indeed a safe place, and that they provide them with tables and chairs and so on of a correct height and so forth to avoid back injuries and all that stuff. So the employer would be on the hook there. That's assuming that the employee is working from home. But I mean, from a legal perspective, most employment contracts will say that your place of work is in a particular office, wherever, or a particular location, and it won't give the employee an entitlement to work from home. So it will be very much at the generosity or discretion, rather, of the employer, and employees need to be aware of that. On the one hand, there's a huge sort of a political push towards allowing employees work from home, etc. That's because politicians are looking for votes. But I mean, employers want performance, and they want, for morale reasons and other reasons, I suppose, to have people back in the office. And a lot of people prefer to be back in the office. So if the employer says, look, that's all very well, I know what the government is saying and encouraging, but we have a contract here and you're obliged to come back to the office and I want you back next week. From a legal perspective, that's the situation, Now, it may well be, as you say, that there may well be a sort of a number of claims going to arise down the line as a consequence of injuries arising at home. I don't know. There is speculation that that might happen, but that remains to be seen yet, But that would be a concern for employers. And it would also be a reason for employers to say, look, we'll get back to the office, At least we can control the environment here. We can carry out a health and safety assessment and so forth,
Yeah, that is a very fair point and very interesting about the chap. I'm going to research more about that case.
Do have
About
a look at the
happening.
one in Germany. Yeah, it was an
Yeah.
interesting one there last week. I think it was the European Court of Justice or somebody, but I think he fell down his own stairs or something. And
Yeah, fair bet, and like living in a very interesting time.
Yeah.
And Terry, you'll be the best person to also inform us regarding. There's also recently announced that when if the employers actually announce that you need to come back to the office, the people have the right to appeal, and there's like a procedure for people to get the agreement from the employer for us to stay and work from home. Can you tell us what is the procedure, and is it something that is again in a gray area where it's for the employer to approve, or what is that case?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest with you, the new legislation that's in the pipeline, I'm not sure it's enacted yet. I'm not sure it's on the statute books yet. I did have a look at it. From an employee's perspective, it's very weak. All they're entitled to do is ask. And the employer does have to go through certain procedural steps. But once the employer goes through the procedural steps, they're in the clear. They can say, no, we've looked at it, we've reviewed the situation, and we want you back in the office. So the right to work from home it's a right to really ask to work from home. And as I say, it is at the moment at the employer's discretion, and it seems to be more of a sort of a sop to the employee rather than a real fundamental right that's going to be given practical effect, because if the employer simply doesn't agree to it, well, that's it. All they need to do is carry out some sort of a review and respond to the employee,
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much for that, Terry. And, I think it has actually, at least for me, and I think it will also for a lot of viewers, clear up a lot of misconceptions about,
I think just to be clear, I think it's a right to ask, actually, or right to request it. That's the right that the employee has, but not the right to work from home,
Yeah, that definitely. And I think employers have also been super, I would say, considerate, allowing a lot of employees to work from home, work from different locations. Some have even worked for different, geolocations rather than, within the country. And I think we all loved that flexibility, but it has to normalize sometime soon.
Yep, absolutely.
So, Terry, I would now go through one last area because I wanted to, talk about contracts. So, employment contracts, something that I think a fair amount of people, when they go through their employment contract, at least for the early career birds or early managers, people which are freshly starting, they're just going through their contract as it's a legal paper which allows you to know what your salary is, how much annual leave that I have. Would there be some things that a candidate should make sure that the contract has and has looked into deeply, something that you will advise people to look into before signing it?
Yeah, one thing they should check, employees probably should check, would be restrictive covenants. In other words, the covenants that are going to apply, if any, after the end of the agreement. So if the employee leaves or is dismissed, but if the employee leaves, they may well discover then that there is a restrictive covenant in their contract, which prevents them perhaps from working in the industry for a period of time, maybe 6 months after it. And a lot of employees come to me and say, I'm after getting a new job, I'm delighted with it, but now the old employer is after getting on to me, and they've emailed me and they've drawn my attention to the restrictive covenant in my existing contract. What's the story? Will they enforce it? Well, they may well enforce it. They may well enforce it, especially if you're going to work in the same industry and you have a possibility of inflicting damage on them by bringing clients or whatever. So a restrictive covenant is something, and there may well be a number of them. They would be to prevent you from working in the industry for a certain period of time, to prevent you from bringing clients, to prevent you from bringing colleagues, former employees of or former colleagues of yours as employees to the new place. So that's something that you'd want to be watching out for, you know. Otherwise, the contracts, quite frankly, would be relatively straightforward, because even if a contract doesn't make provision for breaks or for annual leave or whatever, you have a statutory entitlement to those things anyway, you know. But your contract cannot give you more rights than what's provided in statute. So you might get, rather than 4 weeks of annual leave per year, you might get 5 or 6. Well and good. But if the contract was completely silent on annual leave, you can still rely on statute, the Organization of Working Time Act, to get your breaks or get your holidays and so on, you know.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point. Thanks for sharing that, because I think that was also learning for me. Looking at different areas, I've never felt that there should be a need, because a lot of time, if you're working in the same industry but a different project or something, it doesn't come into play. But I completely understand that employer might actually reach out to you and restrict you of working.
One thing I would say, Mac, would be that when employees come to me and I say to them, and they say, I'm after getting a new job, I'm leaving my old one, and I say to them, is there a restrictive covenant in your old contract? They say, God, I don't know. I mean, like, you've signed this contract maybe 3 years before or whatever.
Yeah.
It'd be no harm to actually read it first, you know. So the fact that employees come to me, they're earning big money, they're earning 100 grand a year or whatever, and you're asking them, is there a restrictive covenant in your contract, and they haven't read it.
Yeah.
You know?
No, I think this is exactly why I mentioned, like, people do go ahead with 4 or 5 clauses, which are directly the most important for them, like what am I getting paid, how much is
Exactly.
my
Yeah,
annual
just
leave?
show me the money, you know.
Yeah, and the last part is like the dismissal part, but they
Yeah,
don't check the part which is linked with the dismissal, that it
yeah.
doesn't matter if you're leaving willingly or unwillingly. It is, what will you do after that, like, for
Exactly.
6
And
months, if you're not.
if you've signed up to a restrictive covenant, then it is open to the employer to go to the High Court to get an
Yeah.
injunction to prevent you from taking up the new job and fix you with the cost of going to the High Court, remember.
Amazing. No, that is a fair point. I'll try and highlight this further with my colleagues, my social circle, that this is something that we should all at least pay more attention
Well,
towards,
at
and
least read the contract, you know.
at least go through the full contract. Yes. Terry, one question that I had. This is a question that I wanted to ask. You, since I discovered you, because I'm after recently buying, our own first property in Kildare, and that also after discovering you on YouTube and then other social media platforms, and then recently I saw a post on LinkedIn where you posted that, hey, you create all your content yourself. So I wanted you to share a bit more about your social media content creation journey, and how when did you get started? How has it been going, and how does it work? Has it been great for the business and also the Terry Gorry brand?
I got started, I suppose, 10, 12 years ago, kind of by accident. I was in the Law Society. I was doing a professional practice course, and I began to take notes. And to help myself, I began to just put them on a little website or a little blog that I started, publishing them online. And it allowed me, I'm a great believer in the value of writing, and writing in helping you to A, learn stuff, and B, think through stuff, you know. So I began publishing this stuff online on a website. And the next thing is I was getting queries from people asking me questions. So one thing led to another. I kept at it. And before I knew it, I had a lot of visitors to my website. Then I decided I'd do a video and stick it up on YouTube, simply because I learned from an SEO perspective that a link from YouTube would be good for my website, and then that Google owned YouTube. So I put my first video up 10 or 11 years ago, and I've kept at it ever since. But the starting point for me in the social media, quite frankly, is a blog post, is a written article about something. It might be a case, it might be a change in the law, it might be whatever. And when I publish the blog post on my website, I will then make a video of that of that blog post covering the same thing, and I'll publish that on YouTube. I will then stick it up on Facebook, and I will get Facebook to give me the captions, and I will then stick it up on LinkedIn or on Instagram and LinkedIn and so on. So, but it all starts for me with a simple blog post about something useful. Whatever I'm writing from the business development, client generation perspective, whatever I'm writing must be useful. It must serve some value. It must answer some question for somebody. If it does that, then I will run with it. And then, as I say, I distribute it in the most efficient way that I can across most of the social media platforms, you know?
Yeah. No, it was very interesting for me because you were doing what I've seen agencies do, where you would take one content, then redistribute it in different ways. Also do videos on that, short videos on that, long
Yeah.
form videos on that. So it was very interesting. And have you seen that there's a substantial business benefit for the content that you created?
Yeah, it's been great, to be honest with you. And I mean, the likes of YouTube has been tremendous for me, especially from the point of view of property and property clients and getting clients from outside Ireland, because most people in the United Kingdom or the United States who want to buy a property in Ireland, they will simply do a Google search, and they will one way or another end up probably on YouTube, and they'll come across my video. So I have clients from Germany, from UK, from the United States, buying properties in Ireland all over the country, all over the country. And, you know, I'm the only person, I suppose, they come across on YouTube, well, certainly who's a solicitor, who can actually help them. In other words, A, I'm telling them what the story is and what's involved, but B, I can actually act for them, you know. So
Yeah.
that's been very, very good for me. And I'll continue to do it, you know.
Amazing work, Terry. Because I saw that you're also really good when it comes to trying out different digital medias, and you're quite early, because I've seen that a lot of brands would first question like, "Hey, should I be on a platform? Should I not be?" But I've seen that you try and take the information, as you mentioned, like, is it benefited
Exactly.
somebody, if it is useful for somebody, and then package it accordingly. Because I saw some of your reels, the kind of information you packaged within 30 seconds. It was
Mm,
amazing. And that
yeah.
led for me to go on to the longer form YouTube video, then
Yeah.
go on to
Yeah.
the website, or even reach out to your website and go through the articles.
But just in relation to the reels, Mac, I have a phone here, right?
Yeah.
And I will make a 1 minute video. But when I make the 1 minute video, and I batch make them, so I make them 7 or 8, like for the week, say at the weekend or whatever, it
Yeah.
only takes me 7 or 8 minutes. Then every morning I have got a 1 minute video to distribute. So I go to TikTok, I go to Instagram Reels, I go to YouTube Shorts, and I
Mhm.
go to Twitter
Yeah.
with the one video, and it
Yeah.
takes me 5 minutes. Do you know what I
Yeah.
mean? I'm all over the place. If people, you know what I mean? I look like a
Yeah.
bloody digital agency, but it's
I,
only
I'm
one
gonna add
video,
all your
1
social
minute.
media on the
Exactly.
details of this, because Terry, that is quite frankly, which is something that I was surprised, because I have people that are youngsters, have all the time in the world,
Yeah.
maybe playing 4 or 5 hours a day.
Games.
But they'll
Yeah.
tell me that, oh, it's like, we don't have time to do these activities. And I'm like, yeah, it's like, you're just starting your career, you will be looking for your first job in the next year or something. And when they say we don't have time to maybe discover their brand, build their personal profile on digital media platforms, but looking at the opportunity out there, fantastic work. And you said you batch this content. I have so far had multiple experts on this podcast, all from different avenues. Something everybody has in common. Like, I
Yeah.
personally batch produce content. The guy
Yeah.
that was talking about crypto and finances, that was one of the first guests on the podcast. He said that I produce content on the weekends. Like, I spend either Saturday
Yeah.
or Sunday, do it for the entire week, and then for the entire week I am back to my job, and I'll just on
Yeah.
morning just post on
Yeah, no,
YouTube.
I do the same thing, and I do the same thing certainly with the short videos. With the longer videos, I tend to do them at the weekend or whatever.
Mhm.
But I will probably batch them as well. I could do 2 or 3 or 4 on a Saturday and Sunday.
Yeah.
And on YouTube at the moment, I have 5 videos uploaded, all ready to go whenever I want to go. You know what I mean? So I'm never under pressure, and I make them as it happens. And I'll scan the Irish Times, for example, in the morning, or some newspaper, and if there's an interesting case involving law or some decision, or I'll use Twitter then as well. I've got a list there of relevant legal content, and I'll scan through that, and if there's a relevant change in the law, or if there's a case or whatever, I'll do a blog post and I'll do a video on that. But the starting point is the blog post, then the video, and after that it's just a question of distribution, in the most efficient way I can.
And one thing which was golden for me in what you mentioned, like you skim through the Irish Times. A lot of people don't realize they batch content, but they're not doing a content batch which is relevant to the time and the industry and the trend. And this is another really good point that you mentioned, that you skim through what is related to your niche, what is related to a law that people might have other questions towards. And then you're the first one to produce content on that. There's so many powerful things happening. Yeah.
But remember, these other people have done the work.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And they've done the research.
Yeah.
So Twitter is good for that. I've got a list, and you've got top firms there, top 5, top 10 firms in the country. They've got paralegals, they have trainees, they have associates. They're producing content. I'm skimming it, and I'm picking 1 or 2, and I will then do a riff on it. I'll do a 3-minute, 5-minute video, and the next thing is I'm the man because I'm on YouTube. I've got a video about this. It's relevant and topical. It's the same with the Irish Times. The Irish Times have great journalists. They have great succinct articles, and I will simply scan through it and then do a video.
Exactly. And this is a very very fab advice, because this is something that I've seen allows you to grow. You have a couple of people followed, like a couple of brands, like for you, Irish Times. Everybody living in Ireland that is a certain niche towards maybe fashion should have 5 other brands like that followed.
Exactly.
All of them will be qualified people that are publishing. Even titling their videos after a fair amount of consideration. And if you have that information, skim through it, create a 30-second, 60-second video, that would be great. So far, it has been a great conversation. I have enjoyed, all of it from the, the legal perspective, and also, how you are really, I would say you've already, gained a system of understanding how to create content, and then going through and batching it.
Yeah, the content is critical. The content is critical. And to be honest with you, on YouTube, I have early adopter advantage, and I'm absolutely determined to go to town on it. Do you know what I mean? Because I'm flooding YouTube with stuff, and YouTube, the stuff lasts. It has longevity,
Exactly. And I've seen that you're also one of the early adopters of shorts. So, the minute it came out, I've known people that have big YouTube channels. They're still questioning, should I go shorts or not?
Yeah.
But the reason there's a increasing demand in that YouTube short is
exactly. And YouTube are concerned about TikTok, remember?
Exactly.
And that's why they're pushing shorts,
And you started very early when you mentioned like blogs. You started doing videos because it was improving the SEO.
Yeah.
We tend to forget that we are all social media platforms, but Google and YouTube are search engines.
Yeah.
And the amount of searches that go over there, how can I buy a house in Ireland? How can I, do this or that? Your video pops up at the first one. You will have views coming from everywhere.
Yeah. And much of that stuff, to be honest with you, on YouTube, like, is evergreen stuff. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And the conveyancing system and the process, the law society contract and so on for purchasing and sales of houses, like, that doesn't change a whole lot. You know what I mean? It hasn't changed for decades, so.
And that's a fair. And now I will actually move to the last segment, because we're almost reaching the 60 minutes mark. Terry, will be the segment where I will give you the opportunity to answer 5 of the 6 questions. So you only get to skip 1. But the categories for this will be entrepreneurship, random, the future, the past, relationships, and also self. So I'll give you the first 2 choices. So categories are entrepreneurship and random. Which one would you choose first?
Entrepreneurship.
Okay, let's go for entrepreneurship first. And let's pick up a card. Okay, so we have Things you wish you knew at age 18.
One thing I wish I knew at age 18 would be that when dealing with employees, when dealing with people that you want to persuade or convince, there's more than one, there's a stick and a carrot. And I think I was too inclined to use the stick. I wasn't aware that the carrot can get great results as well. So as I got older, I recognized that more carrot would do. Now, I'm not always an angel or anything, but I think I used to be very one-dimensional with the stick, you know?
Yeah. That's a fair, I think, insight, and it's great to know that your way of managing, because I've been in the industry myself for now 9 years in the management side of things, and the last 5 years being manager of people, I've seen myself evolve. Learning
Yeah, I've
from
seen it. I've seen it myself. And look, it can take a while, but people require sort of sometimes different approaches, you know.
yeah, and that is really good. Now let's see the past and the future. So you want to go to the past first or the future?
Future.
Let's go to the future first. Things you want to learn in the next 12 months.
I would like to improve, I suppose, my public speaking in the next 12 months. I'll probably improve my public speaking and keep a tighter rein on my chimp. My chimp gets out sometimes. In other words, control over my temper and responding to things in a less than rational way, you know. There's a great book I'd recommend to anybody, The Chimp Paradox. It's an excellent book. I'm, signed up subscriber to it, but try to put into effect the teachings every day, you know.
Yeah, and you wanted to, I would say, like, you want to further improve in your public speaking, because so far what I've seen over all the platforms, I think you're a fabulous speaker, Terry. So
thanks,
there
Mike.
is definitely no, second thoughts on that. So would we want to move to past next?
Yeah.
So let's go to the past and check. Activities you can do this week to get out of your comfort zone. I don't think this is past. Just give me 1 second. I think there is a boo-boo I made. Go to the blue section. Yeah, some positive, self-thoughts that come to your mind thinking about what you did 10 years ago.
About what I did 10 years ago?
Yeah.
Well, 10 years ago when the property market crashed, I lost everything actually, and I recovered. So I suppose my response and my reaction to that was positive, was good. It's worked out pretty well. And I must say that, thinking about that, it could have gone either way. And a lot of people chose the other route, feeling sorry for themselves and blaming the blame game, blaming builders, blaming banks and so forth. But I took a different route. I went back to study law late in my life, and I'm happy that I did that. And that response, I must say, has been one that has served me very, very well, you know.
That is great, Terry. I think the point that you made, that you took a step back, went into education, and I've seen that most of the time, even in this session, you're very mindful of what's happening around you, very self-aware of the situation on both the micro and also the macro level, which is fantastic for me. Something that I've definitely taken and learning on this one. Next question, and the choices are random versus self.
Self.
Let's pick up a card from self. We'll take something from the middle. Things that motivate you, Terry.
Things that motivate me.
Yes.
I suppose, my work motivates me. It might be boring to say that, but I actually enjoy my work. And the motivation, I suppose, is just to continue to grow as best I can and as best the firm can. And, I get a lot of motivation from the work. And I suppose that's really it, you know. I look after myself then as well, but exercising and so forth. But the work is a big part of my life, I suppose, you know.
No, that's a fair point, and I don't think that's boring because a lot of people don't understand that. I've moved initially from a retail job back to a job that pays me 10K less.
Mm,
At the time when I was making that decision, everybody thought that I'm really going insane because a lot of people would not take a pay cut to move to a job that pays you less and gives you something. But I wanted to exit that vicious cycle of first
mm,
going on a job that you don't like, getting the pay, and then going out to spend that on things that I
yeah,
love. What
yeah.
I did was small adjustments. I was like, finding a job that I'm very comfortable at, I'm
Mm,
good at, and I also feel happy at. If I
yeah.
can find that balance and do things like starting this podcast, getting to connect with people like yourself and other leaders across the industry, that fills me so much that I don't have to wait till the weekend arrives to do something that I
Yeah.
would love to.
Yeah, well, every day is okay, you know. Every
Yeah,
day, like it's not party center or anything, but you don't dread going to work. You actually enjoy going to work. I used
yeah,
to dread going to work in a relatively short period of time.
yeah.
So you know, it's nice to be looking forward to going to work. You know.
Yeah, and I think the last few years there has been like a major focus, advertisement, motivational speakers. Everybody has been talking about start your own business, be your own boss, and I've been literally telling, at least in my social circle, like if you want to start a business, you can do that, but don't give me the argument that you're starting a business because you want to quit 9 to 5.
Mm,
Everyone that I know that have started a business, they don't work 9 to 5, they work double those hours. They're
exactly. Yeah.
working across the clock, they're working every day, they're working the weekends. It's it's finding that one job or business that
Mm,
fulfills you to a limit that it doesn't feel like work. And
yeah.
that's where I think finding that peace within your life, substance, would make you really really knock. So, Terry, last option, and you can answer both or you can skip one question, is random and relationships.
Relationships.
Yeah, okay, let's go with relationships. Ways to start a conversation with a new person.
Where should you start?
Oh, no, it is ways. So, what are some ways that Terry would use to start a conversation with a new person?
A new person.
Yeah.
Well, I guess I just asked them how they're doing and you know how is the day going so far.
And yeah, it's like that's a simple but effective way of starting. So, Terry, now I'll actually move to the last one, and we'll just go ahead with random. So let's see things that make Terry smile.
Um, I don't know, just good days, I suppose, in work and accomplishing. I mean, closing sales, closing property sales. I think I'd have to say I get a good degree of satisfaction out of that, especially when it's a young couple perhaps buying their first property. You know,
Yeah,
it's nice
that
to send them an email saying congratulations, you can pick up your keys there from the estate agent now. The sale is closed. So I think that makes me smile. You know.
and that's a good one because I've experienced that firsthand. I remember that buying your first house in the Irish market has been like a long chase, but when it gets accomplished, it feels like, oh, we've done like a massive, massive, trophy.
Yeah, look, it is stressful. There's no doubt about it.
It
It
is.
is stressful.
Yeah. Terry, thank you very much for being a part of the show. Thank you very much
All
for
right, Mike. Thanks
taking the
for
time out.
inviting me on. Enjoyed it.
And I loved every minute of it. There was a lot of learning for me. What I'm going to do is after this goes live, the live sessions will stay on LinkedIn, YouTube, and Facebook, but I will update all the links that we've discussed. The Citizens Foundation's website, we're talking about the different bodies. I'll link the videos and also the social media accounts
Yeah,
for Terry in the description of the videos on all platforms. And then I'll send you the file for this video in the Google Drive very soon as well. Have a
great stuff.
lovely lovely day ahead,
You
and
too, Mike.
talk to you soon.
Thanks a lot. Thank you.
Bye
Bye.
guys.